Is this a Dharma issue? I think so. The Dharma teachings are all about relieving suffering, and this crisis will bring unprecedented suffering on all levels. So how can it not be a practice issue? And just to underscore this, two of the most inspiring translators of the Pali Canon have chimed in a very powerful way, saying this is a Dharma issue. One of them is Venerable Anālayo, who you will see in a little while. Anālayo is this amazingly deep, brilliant mind, Buddhist scholar who knows the Pali Canon back and forth, backwards and forwards, and the Mahayana Chinese canon and the Tibetan canon, and compares them all. And he's also this meditation master who, when you sit with him, you feel the power of his practice. And Jane and I did a retreat with him earlier this spring on anapanasati, mindfulness of the breath, and the sutta that the Buddha talks of on this. Very deep internal teachings for 1 week. And we were kind of going inside and noticing 16 different stages of going deeper and deeper into the breath. And then the last day of his teaching, he came into the morning teaching here, and he said, up the hall, and he said, today, this morning, I'm going to talk about climate change. Took us all by surprise. And he said, some people think that this is not an appropriate topic for the Dhamma Hall. I want you to know, I think it is perhaps the most important thing we can be speaking about. And I didn't know the extent that he not only cared about this issue, but was deeply involved in this issue. And I'll say more about that, and you'll hear more from him in a little while. The other great Pali scholar is Bhikkhu Bodhi, who's translated all the great thick compendiums, the middle-length discourses and the connected discourses, and all of these great practice references of the Buddha's words. And he is incredibly passionate about making a difference in this world, that this is not just about finding your own peace inside. He says, the special challenge facing Buddhism in our age is to stand up as an advocate for justice in the world, a voice of conscience for those victims of social, economic, and political injustice who cannot stand up and speak for themselves. And this includes planet Earth. This, in my view, is a deeply moral challenge marking a watershed in the modern expression of Buddhism. I believe it also points in a direction that Buddhism should take if it is to share in the Buddha's ongoing mission to humanity. And he recently gave a speech to the UN General Assembly on climate change. This is an issue central to our practice. So, for our next presentation, this will be Venerable Anālayo, who I mentioned before, who was born in Germany in 1962, ordained in Sri Lanka in 1995. I can say all these things, but you got who he is. He's special. And just want to mention, we did a conversation last week or 2 weeks ago. He practices on Sunday. He says, it's on a Sunday. I can't do a live conversation because I have a commitment to just practice on Sunday. And he did this conversation the day after he came out of a 5-week retreat, self-retreat. And I didn't know this before, but the retreat was on the theme of climate. And every day he would contemplate it and turn it around and deepen his understanding and what the Dharma has to offer. And he has just sent me the PDF of a book that will be coming out next spring on the Dharma and climate. So he cares, and invite you to care with him. Venerable Bhikkhu Anālayo. Well, Bhante, I'm so happy that you could take some time from your schedule to talk about this topic and be with us today. I know that your words have impact on many people, so I'm looking forward to this conversation. And I want to start by saying I read the paper that you wrote on climate, which was really insightful and brought into the tradition. And one of the things that I was struck by is your concern with climate. And I remember that when I sat with you this last spring and we did the Anapanasati Sutta in depth, the last morning you came into the hall and you said, this morning I want to talk about climate change. And to paraphrase, you said something like, some people don't think this is an appropriate topic for the Dharma Hall. And I want you to know that, in my opinion, it might be one of the most important things we can talk about in our Dharma practice. Mm-hmm. And I was struck by that, as I think many people were. And I'd like you to just speak a little bit to fleshing that out a bit, why you think this is should be so central to our practice.
Well, I mean, there's two perspectives to look at. I mean, one is, of course, the actual situation, the repercussions of climate change, but I assume that during this whole day long, this will be taken up by enough other people. So we just know that this is a very, very serious crisis and we're heading for probably a catastrophe. So why should we look at that? This may be more what I can contribute to this meeting. You see, the thing for me is that I grew up as an Asian Buddhist. I have my whole Buddhism is Asian, and I lived in Asia. And for me, this kind of compartmentalization that we sometimes get in the West is something that is new to me. I have never really understood why we need to divide either being activist or other being meditator. For me, from the outset, the two just belong together. And maybe that is also the influence by my teacher, Godwin Samararatna. Mm-hmm. You see, we had this meditation center in Kandy that I was running, but at the very same time, we were also doing social work. And I don't see how we could do otherwise if we are sincerely and genuinely practicing mindfulness. Because mindfulness is something that makes me more aware. It makes me more aware of what happens inside, but it also makes me more aware of what happens outside. And when I see that there's suffering outside, how can I close my eyes and say, you over there suffer, I want to meditate? That's not really possible. I give priority to the practice, and I do that very much. But for example, there in Sri Lanka, we were doing there's lots of poor people there. We were doing whenever I would go to Germany to visit my parents, I would collect glasses because they don't have money to buy glasses. And Westerners, they buy a new pair, they don't need the old one. Mm. And every time I was coming back with this huge luggage, just full with glasses. And because they were actually just taking them as they are, which is not good for their eyes, I was always having a hammer and having to break the glass so that they only get the frame. And then we had a whole system of how some Westerners could sponsor that those who don't have money. And there was a special doctor who was just taking only the minimum amount of money for that, who was then putting the right glasses in for them. And that was just such a natural thing and such an obvious thing to do. And all kind of things, people who are poor, and there were always poor people coming into the center. But at the same time, I was living my life half of the week in silent retreat, and now I'm doing 5 days of the week in silent retreat. I think there's not many people who can claim to do as much of intensive silent meditation as I do. And it is not that because of that I'm stepping out of the world. I'm precisely because I'm doing that, I also have to see what's happening outside and have to take a position. And I have to particularly make sure that I can bring whatever little bit of understanding and wisdom I may gain in my practice, that I can offer that for the general welfare, for the general benefit. Mm-hmm. So mindfulness, if we are genuinely mindfulness, it starts with the internal, moves to the external, and eventually combines both, internal and external. And so it's to just think about my own practice and not see what are the current challenges in the world close by or on the global level that needs to be faced. I think it loses out of sight the external dimension of mindfulness. And with this, I'm not at all saying don't meditate and just go out on the streets and be active. Not at all. In fact, I think much of the activism could have a better effect if it were more informed by a meditative attitude. So I really see it playing off in both ways. And my personal vision is really that facing climate change as an integral and even a very powerful dimension of meditation practice aimed at awakening. Mm. Because it's such a challenge, and to face that challenge, to learn from that challenge, is an incredible potential. And I see a key in mindfulness there. This is why I wrote that article. And right now, I'm working on a book actually called Mindfully Facing Climate Change. I really think that mindfulness has a key element to contribute, because the information about climate change is hardly new. We know about that for many, many years. And there is a whole range of studies being done outside of the Buddhist field, trying to understand how come that we have all this information and not taking the action. And that is because catastrophic visions tend to bring up fear, grief, or numbing. We are giving people strong information, but we are not telling them how to deal with it. Because what can the individual do at that point? And this is where mindfulness, I think, comes in, because mindfulness can have that cushioning or protecting effect. Mindfulness has that with physical pain. It has proven that in the secular realm. It has that also with mental pain. The Buddha recommends repeatedly for strong grief. Sariputta has passed away. Ananda is totally upset. The Buddha is about to pass away. Ananda is totally upset. He says, be a refuge to yourself. Become self-reliant through mindfulness. Mindfulness is the way to deal with grief, with sorrow, with terror, with fear, because it does not suppress, but it also does not act it out. It is that middle position of being just learning how to face the situation, and out of that facing with mindfulness, finding a point of balance. And out of that point of balance, then become active.
Can I just follow up on this issue of grieving, which is part of the process that we all,
of course,
who cares and is aware and is going through before one can act mindfully and skillfully. One has to digest the grief. And I wonder if you could say a little bit about that process, because it's one thing to see, oh, it's just grieving, it's empty, and one can just look at the truth. But what do you do with all of those feelings? Maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Well, first of all, I think the most important step is to not suppress anything. Mm-hmm. To really be with what arises. But for me, for example, I have done a lot of recollection of death. And so there's a whole preparation that brings me to this situation. And it is just that now the death the awareness of death is just becoming larger because it affects the whole world. But for me, the thing is, there's this training, there's this knowing that let me put it like this, my first responsibility is to be with what is. However, mindfulness gives me that overview of the whole situation and also lets me know what is skillful and what is not skillful. And to be wallowing in grief, this is the near enemy of compassion. And even in psychology, we know grief is not a good motivator for action. It can lead to short-term action, but it's not something that can sustain. So I'm just knowing that this is a condition right now which is not particularly helpful, not particularly useful. I'm not being judgmental, I'm not suppressing it, but I know that just living out this grief and making it worse and worse is not really helpful. And then I find several points important. For example, I don't think in terms of persons. Just now we have the Amazon burning. Very, very, very painful. We know who is responsible for it, but I am not even using that name. I'm just thinking this as a mental state totally under defilements. There's so much hatred in that mind. To do this, there's just, so it's not for me like this particular person in that kind of government is doing such and such a thing, but just like, wow, look how much defilements can be suicidal, how much they can be destructive. And that already takes out some of the, because when it becomes personal, it's more easier to focus and become really angry with the kind of person. Yeah. And then the overall position is simply to see the whole thing in terms of mental states, to see it in terms of what is wholesome, what is unwholesome. And that is also a perspective that can motivate me to have a very clear-cut position on environmental issues from an early Buddhist point, because, as has been much discussed in the scholarly literature, early Buddhism is not giving you the tools to value nature as such. Nature is not invested with some sort of inherent value for its own sake. And the doctrine of dependent arising is not about a general principle of interdependence. It is about specific conditionality, specific conditions. In fact, as has already been pointed out in the literature, theory of general interdependence would not really be a firm grounding for ecological action, because if I'm interdependent with the rainforest in the Amazon, etc., I am also interdependent with the nuclear power plant and the industrial waste. And so this is not really giving me a clear edge for saying, okay, I have to, this is better than that. And another thing is that in early Buddhism also the earth has never been anthropomorphized. So this idea of Mother Earth that is very widespread, again, you cannot really sustain that from the perspective of early Buddhism. And again, this also has the same problem as interdependency, because if I perceive the earth as a sentient being that graciously provides me with food and shelter and living conditions, then I also have to attribute to that same kind of intentional sentient beings volcanoes, earthquakes, and tsunamis. So there again, there's a kind of limitation in using this kind of ideas. And so if I stop out of these ideas and instead make my foundation simply on the ethical, I see it as the three root poisons. The three root poisons are at work and are destroying this world. And my path is the opposite path, is the getting out of these root poisons, out of greed, hatred, and delusion. That's a very clear-cut thing. It gives me a very clear ethical perspective, which is so central in Buddhism, the ethics. And it gives me an incentive to act. And it takes out a considerable part of those things that could make me feel suffer, that could make me give grief. Because if I start to love the earth as my mother, and then there is this one particular person, you know the name I have in mind, who is doing such and such a kind of thing, how can I not get grief? Yes. I think the situation, this is just, I mean, I'm not intending here to criticize anybody or say I've got it right. It's just you asked me, so this is the way I take it. So I'm just saying mindfulness makes me aware, look, if I do like this, there'll be grief. If I do like that, there'll be less grief. If I start falling in love with polar bears and start going, oh, I love these polar bears and I want them to stay and I want them to be, that is not a very intelligent way to do, because polar bears are not going to stay. We know that already now. And anyway, if I would meet a polar bear and would go over and hug him, you know what he would do? He would not start hugging me. So this romanticized idea about certain animals or nature are productive of grief. That doesn't mean that I don't care about nature. Of course, I love nature. And early Buddhism has a lot of appreciation for nature. We have all these, even Mahakassapa in his verses describing, oh, I love these rocks and the forest and the flowers. And there's a whole discourse that Chulagosinga Sutta, which starts off on the delightful moonlit forest night, fragrances. But all of these are instrumental. They're instrumental to something, a soteriological perspective. They point to something else.
Let me just follow up about the three poisons, as you mentioned, greed, hatred, and delusion. And in your paper, you talked about how they lead to responses of denial and anger and resignation. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I need to start by saying that this is my own cross-matching. I don't really have early Buddhist canonical authority for that. It's just my own way of cross-matching that. But what I'm basically saying is, as I am perceiving the whole situation in terms of mental states, and as I cannot right away now also work on the state of hatred that is burning down the Amazon forest, I start with myself. This is where Satipatthana practice starts. In order to come to understand what's happening inside, and that is mindfulness practice. So is there one of these present there? And so I have kind of brought these in relationship to three types of reactions. One is, of course, the denial reaction, the pretension that it's not really happening, it's not really bad, and we shouldn't be listening to these reports. And anyway, I have more important things to do, and this I match it to green, because it's really the wanting to continue to enjoy the pleasures of my present situation without having to really look at the consequences. And then the next one, anger, is when seeing what's happening, and then particularly when seeing the injustice that those who have the least contributed are the ones who are the first who are going to suffer. It's the third world country who gets the worst part of all of this. Mm-hmm. And all the pain and how it's affecting the animals and how it's affecting the humans. And when again, then it's very easy to feel anger. But again, as far as I can tell, early Buddhism, and I'm just speaking from an early Buddhist perspective, does not really authenticate or authorize righteous anger. That might be different in other traditions, but it's not there. And there's sometimes, I was just looking it up, there's sometimes the argument that the Buddha got angry at Devadatta. There's this story about this Devadatta who wanted to split the monastic community. And so he walks up to the Buddha and says, Bhante, you're old now, let me take it over. And the Buddha gives an answer in which he calls him a piece of spittle. And so this is usually interpreted as a sign that the Buddha also called get angry. And if, of course, the Buddha can get angry, why shouldn't we get angry? But here I think we need to keep in mind that this is a story in the Vinaya. And Vinaya narrative has teaching functions. It's not an accurate historical report. And so when we come across a certain Vinaya narrative, we have to look at the different parallel versions. I don't want to talk too much about that now, but basically the idea is we have this oral transmission lineages, different versions, and we can compare them. And with the Vinayas, we have one first kind of split of oral transmission lineages, and one is the Mahasanghika and the other one is Tabiras. In the Mahasanghika Vinaya, the whole episode is not found at all. Nothing about Devadatta walking up there and saying, give me the leadership and stuff. So we can be pretty sure that this is not a historical event. It's not actually that the Buddha really said, you piece of spittle. It's just something that came into being later. And so these stories, we have to be a little bit careful how we interpret them. But basically, I think there's a lot of room for strong, stern action. Good, stand up. Don't let them do what they're doing, but with equanimity. With equanimity, please. Let us not join the game of the defilements, because the situation is a product of defilements. And the last one is resignation. And this is, I think I match it to, I see it as a form of delusion. It is that feeling that this whole situation is overwhelming. I'm just one individual, what can I do? And then just withdrawing from it. But that misses out on the fact that every society is made up of individuals. And if I, just for the sake of my own practice, my own walking the path, embody what I want to be done, what I think should be done, and others would also be doing it, the whole world would change. It's not the question whether one person can change the world, but whether every individual can make a contribution to the change of the world. And I think the delusion here comes a little bit from our lack of understanding of causality, that causality is always like different things contributing to a situation, and this belief in monocausality that is very widespread, particularly among Westerners due to the influence of Christianity. The belief in a creator God naturally encourages thinking in terms of monocausality. But if we all see ourselves from the outset, not as I am responsible and I have to change the situation, but I'm taking responsibility to contribute to the situation, then we can come out of resignation. And so I see it as a continuous mindfulness practice to simply see where I am. Like doing this I'm just coming out of 5-week retreat, and climate change was my main topic every morning. Recollection of death, and then going into the end of humanity, the end of animals, the destruction of the earth, and just sitting with that, and just being mindful of what it does to me, what is happening, and just building up my inner resilience. Because I believe that this is really the main thing we need to be looking at now, to build up our own resilience. Because something is definitely going to happen, and we have to learn to adapt to that. We have to get ready for that. So my own vision is kind of there's this 3 interrelated or overlapping areas. One is we need activity, we need ecological activism, we need people out on the streets, like now going to the embassies of this particular country where the Amazon is being run. Very good action that is needed, but we also need we need compassionate action. We have already now people are dying of hunger in the world, and that will be quickly increasing. So something like Bhikkhu Bodhi's global belief is a very good thing. And we need to work on our own resilience. We need to really build up those mental resources that we can face what's going to come. And that we will be able to use what is happening for our own benefit and for the benefit of others.
So, and the last one with delusion and resignation, you saying that if there's confusion, you don't see you're not motivated to make an action if you just think, oh well, this is just the way it is, and there's not much I can do about it.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. So, and now I'm curious, since I hadn't known that your 5-week retreat, you were so focused on climate change. You just came out of it, so no one would know that, I guess. Did you go through your own feelings and emotions that would come up as you were practicing resilience? And if you did, how could you describe a bit about how you personally would work with them?
Well, I give emphasis to the 2 main wings of compassion and emptiness. And so that is like mindfulness monitors. And when I feel that I'm kind of becoming too comfortable with it, I give more importance to compassion. And when I feel that it starts hurting, I give more importance to emptiness, just said very simply. And then sometimes I use reflections, sometimes I use images. For example, I had this image of the whole earth being just burnt, everything just dead. And then this is, it's a little personal, but doesn't matter. I really love Michelangelo's David. And so there was this piece of David just lying around, half broken, and me just thinking, nobody will even know who's David, who's Michelangelo. I mean, this is extreme. This is just total extinction. But just to see, can I take it that far? Can I be with that and just watch that? What it does to me, and everything happening like that was so cute. You know, in the morning we have these porcupines, and they separate during the day. In the evening they meet, and they would meet right in front here, so I can see them. And the mother would go up and let the little one drink the milk. And so to sit there and see that and be with that in the moment, but at the same time think, you know what's going to happen? To have these two and just have both of them in the field of my mindfulness, and to be able to enjoy this porcupine mother going up, and then the little one nuggling, and then she goes down, the little one once more goes and hits it on the back, and she pushes it away, and this whole kind of seeing that happening and being able to enjoy that, but at the same time with that clarity that these kind of things, if things continue the way they are, they will not happen for much longer. I found it very powerful, and it really, I feel in these 5 weeks I have been able to build up my inner resilience. And the key tool is mindfulness always. Mindfulness tells me where it's getting too much, you know. Sometimes I start to settle in too much. The urgency, the danger, the problem is not so clear. Sometimes it gets a little bit too overwhelming. Like when I did that with that piece of David lying around, it was very strong. Then I had to go like, okay, let's be it for the time being, and I do more compassion practice and more emptiness practice according to what is needed.
Mm-hmm. So you yourself, I'm glad you bring that up, and just bring a little bit more understanding on that you yourself have to work with the feelings that come up. It's not like you can just say, oh, well, I just be mindful and that takes care of it. They come up for you, and you're sorting out and bringing some space around them and equanimity and around them. Because it's one could get the impression, oh, well, you know, sure, he's doing all this sitting, it's easy for him, but you have these feelings, and it's in process that you work with these feelings.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm glad to clarify that. And what you're saying about compassion and emptiness, another way that I think of it, and just let me check this out with you, is I think of balancing compassion with equanimity, which is a kind of, when I'm getting too close and my heart is breaking, I need some space. Yeah. And when I'm getting too distant and disconnected, I need to get a bit closer.
Excellent.
And so it's a continual monitoring of that. Mm-hmm. So I as I mentioned in preparation for this, I sent you a question, and I want to hear what you have to say. For me, it makes a difference if there is at least a potential positive vision of where this is going. Mm-hmm. Of course, as I once heard the Dalai Lama say, world systems come and go, and we don't know what's going to happen. And so to have the broken David as a reality. But I wonder if you could say some words about your most inspiring vision that can keep you motivated enough to not only work on your practice, but to have other people in their own way inspired by a vision of somebody with such deep practice as yourself. Do you have that kind of a way of holding the situation?
Well, first of all, I would be reaching out to others even if I did not have that. That is what I was trying to make clear at the beginning. I have this image that I'm going all the way for arahantship, but my arms are wide, spread out, and wherever I can catch, I carry them along. So that is just my own image. But I see an incredible potential in this situation. because I don't remember who said that, but somebody said there's bad news and good news. Bad news, human civilization is not going to continue. Good news, human civilization is not going to continue. And he meant it just not continue the way we know it. And so there is an incredible potential that this serious crisis will bring us all to our senses. That it will actually lead to a raise in global awareness. That we will suddenly all be forced to realize that we have to step out of our individual, narrow, confined sense of identity, whether it be national or racial or whatever it is. And we have to see what is common among us. And we have to learn to become really Homo sapiens sapiens, really wisdom humans. And so I think this is precisely why I think our individual input as Buddhist practitioners is so crucial, because it can just be that little one thing that makes the difference. The situation can lead to an apocalypse, but it can also lead to a transformation of humanity. A transformation of humanity that steps out of this self-centeredness, materialism, capitalism, however, and that learns to live with each other in respect, with mindfulness, in harmony with nature. That is possible. And for that to happen, we need this kind of crisis, actually. You know, the alternatives of a nuclear war, that would be very quick happening, and you don't have any chance to work. So that is happening in this time, and that there is this time span where we know, like, what's happening now is going to only show its results within 20 years. It's a problem for us to get active, but it is also an advantage. It's an advantage because we can really work. And the amount of people who are aware, who are out on the roads, who are active, is staggering. We have never seen that before. All over the world, people are working, doing, concerned with this. So just that one thing that I think can make the difference is mindfulness. Because many of them do not have the tools, the mental culture tools to handle the pain and the grief. And mindfulness, fortunately, has now become a non-religious commodity that is available all over the world. You can do your MBSR course anywhere without needing to convert to a particular religion. And so this is particularly the tool we need right now. And we just have to make that connection. We have to help people to make that connection. There is a kind of mental quality, and you don't have to become even a Buddhist, but with that mental quality, you can actually handle this situation. It can strengthen your input, and it can lead to an increase in global awareness.
So if I hear you right, you're saying that our practice is not just for our own ease of mind and peace of heart, but it really makes a difference in bringing more consciousness into the world, and there's a rippling effect.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And each of us has to find our own mixture of how much actual ecological activism, how much compassionate activism, and how much actual practice. But we should not neglect any of these three areas.
Mm-hmm. And just one more thing along those lines. It's so easy to feel guilt that we're not doing enough, or that somehow, you know, I can't make a difference. And what do you do with that guilt?
Well, I think if I approach it, you see, I approach my whole conduct from the viewpoint that this is a mindfulness training. And so it's a training in being aware of the three poisons, and it's also training in trying to embody as a mindfulness practice the type of conduct that I think is appropriate. And now as meditators, we of course know that it's not every time we sit down to meditate that we'll be completely concentrated. Sometimes there are days we'll be very distracted, and we just sit with that. We have learned to be with that. So I have also learned to be with that my engagement, my conduct is sometimes as high as I would like it to be, and sometimes a little less. I don't even need to go through this whole guilt and forgiveness kind of thing, because that's just the way it is. Mm. Today my mind is like when I came out of the retreat after 5 weeks, and the evening meditation on the first day of talking, it will be horrible. The mind will be all over the place, and then I just sit with that. And that's just the way it is. So I know one woman, she was saying that she had stopped using escalators, yeah. The electrical things that get you up and down the stairs, escalators. And then after some time, she started using them again and felt guilty about it. And I just thought, like, hey, I mean, if today is the day for you to use the escalator, then just mindfully use it. And maybe tomorrow you want to walk the stairs again. We don't have to get into this whole guilt and forgiveness kind of thing, but just see it as every day I'm trying what at that day within my personal situation, my limitation seems meaningful and possible. It's just a gradual growth. We are growing with this. We are not giants that are able to do everything that we can think of, but we're also not dwarfs.
So one moment at a time.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much, Bhante, for your caring and your practice and your inspiration. It's inspiring to me, and I'm sure to many people. So go forth, carry on, and keep on inspiring. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much for allowing me to be part of this. I wish all of you well.